And in the beginning of it all, a young man named Yamori leaves his house to go for a walk in the early hours of the morning, something unusual in his routine. While swinging in a park, Yamori recounts his current situation as a 14-year-old in his second year of elementary school. Among his memories, Yamori recalls rejecting a girl he liked, saying he doesn't quite understand how dating works. At another point, the girl's friends come to him to hold him accountable, and Yamori simply apologizes, still unsure of what to say, and suddenly, Yamori falls off the swing after losing control of the toy, and then decides to sit on the park bench while lamenting that he can no longer sleep. Then, a message pops up on his cell phone, and Yamori begins to despair, thinking that his parents had discovered that he left the house alone. However, he is more relieved to see that it is just a browser pop-up. Upon leaving the park, Yamori decides to stop by a vending machine to buy a drink, until suddenly, he comes face to face with a girl named Nazuna, who, upon seeing him buying a drink, asks him about his age. After all, he doesn't look more than 20. At this, Yamori starts to change the subject, saying that he is buying that drink for someone else. With that said, he begins to despair and tries to run away, but the girl grabs his arm and makes it clear that she doesn't plan to take him to the police or anything like that. Instead, she intends to help him with his insomnia. The two begin walking together through the streets, and Yamori wonders what she meant by helping him. As for Nazuna, she begins to lecture him on what keeps people awake at night. And in the end, she says there's only one reason people stay awake at night. They're simply not satisfied with the way they spent their day. She shows 3 men sleeping on a bench and says they've actually had a productive day, as reflected in their deep sleep. But upon closer inspection, Yamori realizes they're actually just drunk. As for Nazuna, she begins greeting them as if she's known them for a long time. Yamori asks her about her relationship with the 3, and she says she met them instantly, as nighttime is the time when everyone frees themselves from the constraints of the strict society in which they live. Hearing this, Yamori returns to the group of drunken friends and tries to greet them just as Nazuna did. But just then, one of the men vomits all the alcohol he'd consumed that night, leaving Yamori stunned. Afterward, Nazuna invites him to replace to talk, but once there, she tucks him into bed with her on the same futon. While Yamori tries to fall asleep, Nazuna stands beside him, staring at him and waiting for him to fall asleep. And even though he's faced with a strange situation and a crazy person, Yamori slowly begins to feel relaxed and decides to pretend to be asleep, hoping that Nazuna will fall asleep too and he can go home. But as soon as she sees him sleeping, Nazuna approaches him and begins sucking Yamori's blood, marveling at the taste of his blood. But in the midst of all this, Yamori wakes up, and upon discovering she's a vampire, he begins to worry, believing he'll become a vampire too, since she bit him. But Nazuna makes it clear that he didn't become a vampire, as she sucks people's blood only to feed herself, not to create more of her kind. But still, Yamori questions her why she didn't automatically turn him into a vampire by sucking his blood. Then Nazuna reveals that for a human to become a vampire, they must first fall in love with one. And after that, the vampire must reciprocate the human's love by sucking their blood. And as they enter into this more romantic conversation, Yamori feels out of place, as he doesn't understand the subject at all. At this point, he remembers the time he rejected a girl for being clumsy. Seeing him so down, Nazuna understands how difficult fundamentalist education can be, and then she deduces that he simply dropped out of school to play hooky at night. She encourages him to continue down this path, as he needs to stay awake until he feels satisfied with his day. Upon hearing this, Yamori interrupts her and asks her to turn him into a vampire, so he can continue to enjoy the night more intensely. Therefore, Yamori asks Nazuna to allow him to fall in love with her. She reminds him that it's against his apolitical will to produce offspring, but she decides to make an exception just for him. With that, to climb up a building, and Nazuna explains that human blood tastes best at nightfall, more precisely when a person is sleeping. After all, that's when human blood merges with the night. As for Yamori, he asks her what they're doing up high. Nazuna says it brings them closer to the moon. However, Yamori reminds her that the distance to the moon is still absurdly far, even though they've climbed a building. Nazuna realizes he still doesn't understand the concept of infusing human blood with the night, and so she kicks him off the building, sending him falling toward the avenues. So, Yamori can understand how to enjoy the night, but in the middle of the fall, the boy feels like he is about to die, until suddenly, Nazuna goes to him and catches him in the air. The following night, Yamori meets Nazuna again to enjoy another intense night with her. As they discuss his plan to turn her into a vampire, Nazuna says that by devouring his blood, it's as if she's feeding and copulating at the same time. With that said, she reassures Yamori that they're there that night for one purpose: to turn him into a vampire. At this, Yamori says he already knows that, after all, he needs to find a way to fall in love with her. Hearing this, Nazuna starts to blush with embarrassment and tells him to stop saying that. However, Yamori persists, saying she was about to tell him something when he asked her to turn him into a vampire. At this, Nazuna says she just wanted to ask to take another bite. Then, Yamori simply exposes his neck and tells her to move on. But seeing him showing himself so much, Nazuna tells him to cover his neck. And another day, Yamori looks for her again, but can't find her anywhere. So, he decides to go look for her near his house. But on the way, he ends up meeting her again, and begins to complain about her not having shown up sooner. However, Nazuna says she was just wandering around looking for someone to suck blood. Upon hearing this, Yamori calls her a perverted succubus, and Nazuna tries to change the subject, saying that her sucking human blood is like him eating food. However, Yamori reminds her that she herself said that sucking blood can also be associated with copulation. With that said, he asks to exchange contact information with Nazuna so that they can meet more easily whenever they want. However, Nazuna says she doesn't even have a cell phone. After all, she's never needed one for anything. And suddenly, Nazuna remembers something and calls Yamori to her house again. Once there, she pulls out a prehistoric cell phone the size of her head and says she'll use it to communicate with him. But as soon as Yamori sees the brick, he doesn't know what it is. And Nazuna confirms again that it's a cell phone. Yamori asks her to carry him with her whenever she leaves the house, so they can stay in touch more easily. However, Nazuna refuses to carry that giant cell phone around. So, she lies down and invites him to sleep with her. But before he falls asleep, Nazuna asks to suck some of his blood. Yamori refuses, saying she can look for someone else to suck his blood. Upon hearing this, Nazuna reveals that, in fact, the person she was looking for at that moment was him. The next night, Yamori meets Nazuna and shows her a transmitter watch he just bought. He briefly remembers his childhood when he bought one of these watches to play with alone. While listening to Yamori talk, Nazuna mocks him, telling him he should make friends instead of playing with watches. Hearing this, Yamori tells her to be quiet and explains that his game was to leave the watch somewhere for someone else to find. And since the watch is a transmitter, Yamori expected the person to communicate with him back. But in the end, the person didn't call him, and he also decided not to call the person. With that said, Yamori decides to play a prank on Nazuna using the transmitter watches. They part ways, and then Yamori calls her using his watch, and in the midst of conversation, he shows he's in a hurry to fall in love with her soon. But as soon as she hears this, Nazuna feels embarrassed again and tells him to stop saying such embarrassing things. With that, they continue flying through the city and decide to stop by Yamori's school at night, something he's never done before. But upon thinking about it, he remembers that he's been skipping school even during the day, so being there at night doesn't make any difference. But noticing there's no one around, Yamori feels more comfortable in that environment. As for Nazuna, she goes to him and explains that the way people perceive things around them changes a lot at night, and this even includes the school he hates so much. After all, it doesn't seem so bad now. Hearing this, Yamori says she's right, and suddenly, Nazuna walks towards him and sucks Yamori's blood without even asking, making a lewd comment right afterward about them doing this at school. At this point, Yamori begins to notice a certain duality in Nazuna. While he enjoys making obscene comments and jokes, she blushes when she talks about love and romance, which to him suggests she's never been so intimate with a human being before. At this point, he decides to start calling her affectionately again, adding the honorific Chan to her name, to create a sense of closeness between them. But upon hearing this, Nazuna becomes embarrassed again and asks him to add the honorific San to her name, which, in this case, is a more formal way of addressing someone without giving off such a strong sense of closeness. After the conversation, Yamori heads home, and on the way, he remembers the watch he had left for someone else to pick up, and wonders who could have taken it from. Until suddenly his watch rings, and then a mysterious girl appears behind him calling him by his name. Upon seeing the girl, Yamori remembers her name is Akira. Another day, he meets Nazuna, who asks him again if he has any friends. Yamori questions her about what exactly a friend is. After all, he doesn't know how to separate the line between acquaintances and friends. Nazuna then says that someone becomes your friend when you see them that way. The next day, Yamori meets Akira again and asks why she has his transmitter. She reminds him that he was the one who gave her the transmitter watch. She also says she was worried about him stopping going to school, so she decided to contact him through the watch. Hearing this, Yamori is left speechless. After all, he was sure he left the watch in a random place. Akira then explains that the spot where he left it was actually her mailbox. Yamori then realizes it was all a coincidence. After all, he never knew her room number. But for Akira, leaving the watch at her house was his way of showing her his friendship, which made her feel even more relieved. At this, Yamori remembers his childhood when Akira tried to invite him to play with the other children, but he says he's content to just watch the ants on the ground. Akira sits next to him to watch the ants too. Returning to the present, Yamori notices the girl still in her school uniform and assumes she's heading home. However, Akira says she's actually heading to school right now, even though it's 4 in the morning. Hearing this, Yamori is taken aback. but Akira explains that he usually goes for a walk before school. With that, she asks to meet him again at that same place and time. After leaving, Yamori talks to Nazuna about their conversation, saying that he actually had a friend and didn't know it. She, in turn, continues to belittle him for having only one friend, and then hangs up the phone. The next night, Yamori meets Nazuna at her house, but at 3:30 a.m., he prepares to leave. Nazuna begins to tease him, saying that Yamori is a typical man who does the job and then leaves, valuing only the physical relationship. Upon hearing this, Yamori reminds her that in reality, she is the one who does the job herself, since she is the one sucking his blood. Nazuna continues her provocations, suggesting he's going to meet another woman. Seeing that she's right, even though she didn't mean to be, Yamori starts acting strangely, implying she's right. He decides to quickly leave the place, so as not to say anything else that could compromise him. While meeting Akira, Yamori chats away until suddenly, Nazuna appears and starts walking toward them. Yamori breaks out in a cold sweat, believing he's about to be killed by Nazuna. However, she only touches him subtly and says they're having sex outdoors, but she uses an expression Yamori doesn't understand. As for Akira, she finds Nazuna strange and asks if Yamori knows the girl, but before he can answer, Nazuna steps in and says their relationship is purely physical, so Akira can continue to pursue him. But upon hearing all this, Akira embarrasses Nazuna, saying that Yamori probably likes her. Nazuna then bites Yamori's neck to show the true relationship between them. Later, they meet at a restaurant, and Akira takes the opportunity to ask more about Nazuna and why he let her drink his blood. Yamori then apologizes for not telling her sooner and says he doesn't feel comfortable being at school. Akira says he feels the same way, but she asks him to return to school with her. While listening to their conversation, Nazuna becomes irritated at seeing them so close and leaves without paying the bill. Yamori then hands Akira the money and follows Nazuna, and as soon as he finds her, he asks if she's angry and why. Nazuna tries to hide it, saying she's not angry, but then immediately starts cursing him and flies away. He then starts looking for her everywhere, until suddenly his watch rings. At that moment, Yamori starts calling for Nazuna, saying he's never fought with anyone before, so he's never been able to tell when someone is angry or not. With that, he asks her to tell him what made her angry. After all, he intends to make peace with her again. Just then, Nazuna appears in front of him and makes fun of him again, saying that Yamori shouldn't be so worried about making up with a fling. Seeing her mocking, Yamori tells her to stop it, and then Nazuna gets serious again, saying that the fact that he didn't respond when Akira called him to school was what made her angry. Upon hearing this, Yamori reminds her that he doesn't intend to return to school, and the reason he hesitates is because he's not yet ready to tell a human friend that he's no longer attending school to become a vampire. As he speaks, Nazuna notices his mouth bleeding, and Yamori says he tripped and fell on the stairs, which caused a wound on his mouth. Nazuna kisses him to suck the blood from his mouth. The next day, as night falls, Yamori leaves home ready to spend another night with Nazuna, but as soon as he thinks about her, he remembers the moment she kissed him and starts to feel embarrassed. However, he goes ahead and finds her sitting in an easily accessible park, something atypical for her, who is usually in a not very obvious place. Yamori begins to overthink things before approaching her, and so he decides to return home, feeling unwilling to interact with her that day, as he keeps remembering the moment they kissed. Looking around, he sees two couples kissing, and this makes him even more thoughtful. After all, he realizes that only couples or people who love each other end up kissing. Therefore, he suspects that he already likes Nazuna, which in turn means he has already achieved his goal of falling in love with a vampire. At this, Yamori begins to jump for joy, believing that his monotonous, everyday life will finally be replaced by that of a vampire, and he can enjoy the night like never before. Suddenly, Nazuna approaches him and begins to complain about him turning his back and leaving before finding her. Seeing that she's right behind him, Yamori smiles and says she's come at the perfect time. After all, he believes he's already in love with her. Then, Yamori asks Nazuna to bite him, but as soon as she finishes sucking his blood, Yamori remains a human, because unlike what he thought, he is still not truly in love with her. At this, Nazuna explains that he is just confused about what happened between them the night before, because the kiss they shared is not enough to confirm that he is in love with her after all. He just felt a little taste of lust, which is different from passion. Meanwhile, Akira looks at the time on her phone and notices that she's been sleeping much later than usual these past few days. So, she decides to go for a walk, until suddenly she runs into Yamori, who, upon seeing her in uniform, assumes she's going to school. However, Akira simply says that she just got up. Yamori reminds her that it's only midnight, so he finds her waking up at such an unusual time strange. Seeing him judging her for this, Akira reminds him that is also out at the same time. Just like her, As the conversation progresses, Yamori invites Akira to join him and Nazuna. When they meet at Nazuna's house, they decide to distract themselves with some games. Until suddenly, Akira feels a certain discomfort with Nazuna, who keeps saying lewd things. Then, the girl takes the lewdness a step further and sets up a flirting game between girls for Akira and Yamori to play. As the game progresses, Yamori refuses the girl's request to go to school, as he hates the institution with all his might, even within a simple game. However, one of the girls continues to insist, asking him to accompany them to school. At this, Yamori is at a loss, as the girls themselves gave him the option of not going to school if he wanted, but at the same time, they don't want to leave him behind. Suddenly, one of the students falls to the ground, dropping her back. Nazuna focuses his attention solely on the girl's breast, saying they're huge. Seeing her constantly using this erotic term, Yamori tells her to stop, but Nazuna starts to push him even further, asking if he likes big breast. At this, Yamori starts to blush, which makes Nazuna laugh even harder. As for Akira, she's relieved to see that Yamori's personality hasn't changed much since they first met. As the hours pass, Nazuna sees the clock showing for o'clock and suggests they go to bed. Hearing this, Akira is speechless, but she lies down with them anyway. Suddenly, Nazuna begins sucking Yamori's blood right there. Seeing this obscenity, Akira decides to hurry up and leave, as her class starts soon. Nazuna reminds her that it's raining and she doesn't have an umbrella, so there's no way Akira can go to school now. As for the strange relationship between her and Yamori, Nazuna says it's just a matter of supply and demand. In this case, she has a need to fulfill, human blood, and Yamori, in turn, offers her his. Hearing this, Akira remains thoughtful as to why he's doing this. Then, Yamori reveals that he intends to become a vampire one day, and to do so, he must collaborate with Nazuna. With that, they go back to bed, and as for Akira, she makes it clear that she still intends to go to school as soon as the rain stops. However, she ends up falling asleep and wakes up hours later, already late for class. She then tells Yamori that she will head to school, and as for him, Yamori greets her but soon goes back to sleep. At that, Nazuna goes to Akira and says that people usually sleep very well when they feel like they've made the day worthwhile. Upon hearing this, Akira heads to school and thinks about what Nazuna said. While watching TV, Nazuna sees a commercial about an iron and then begins to question what she is doing by just standing there watching TV. With that, Nazuna decides to go out and look for something fun to do. And as she walks through the streets, she notices the seemingly sad people and tells them they should learn to enjoy the night. Seeing an abandoned cat on the street, Nazuna approaches and starts playing with it, but when she notices her hands stinking from the cat's filth, Nazuna goes to a bathroom to clean herself. Afterward, Nazuna runs into Yamori on the streets, and the boy initially mistakes her for someone else, as he doesn't recognize her due to her longer hair. Nazuna explains that her hair looks thicker because she just took a bath. Hearing this, Yamori becomes interested and decides to take a bath too. After leaving the bathhouse, Yamori walks the streets with Nazuna, who asks him what he'd like to do next. Yamori decides to stay quiet, as he's only thinking about inappropriate things because the bath has improved his blood circulation. He then begins to overthink these things and tries to control himself. However, Nazuna stands in the corner, calling his name and asking why his face is red. He in turn interrupts her question, asking Nazuna to suck his blood immediately, so he can calm down and keep any strong emotions at bay. Nazuna begins to suck more blood than usual and apologizes for not being able to hold it in as long as he did this time. As for him, Yamori decides to stop somewhere to rest. As they continue their conversation, once there, Nazuna reveals that he can tell what each individual is thinking just by the taste of their blood. In his case, Nazuna says that Yamori is once again confused about whether or not he's in love with her, all because he saw her with different hair. Hearing this, Yamori realizes that he only sees her as a friend, something that will hinder his goal of falling in love with her. Furthermore, Yamori feels bad about trying to fall in love with her friend, as he considers it immoral. As for Nazuna, she reminds him that this mix of emotions is the key to making his blood more palatable, so she urges him to continue enjoying the night immorally. After all, she provokes him only to spice up his blood. That said, she has the idea of putting on another movie at full volume, so the people in the next room can hear it too. But when she tries to put the video on the TV, she discovers that this hotel service is paid for separately. And at another point, Nazuna points to a drunk on the street and tells Yamori that she already sucked his blood. And as soon as she says this, she notices a certain discomfort in him, and it deduces that Yamori is jealous of hearing about the other guys she's been with. So, to reassure him, she tells him that she also sucked women's blood, and what's more, Nazuna assures him that currently, he's the only person she sucks blood from. Wow. Yeah, complicated, huh? Complicated hearing this. Yamori deduces that before him, she also sucked other people's blood through something. At this, Nazuna reveals that she worked as a professional caregiver in her home. At this, Yamori becomes even more suspicious and says that in fact, she sold R-rated services services. To counter this, Nazuna claims she only slept with the person, which only incriminates her further. However, Nazuna offers Yamori some massage services, saying that this is one of the services she used to provide. As she massages, Nazuna reveals that to obtain blood from people, she had to invent various creative ways. After all, ambushing people is a tactic that simply wouldn't work. Therefore, she resorted to massage, sucking the patient's blood while they were sleeping. However, during the massage, she informs Yamori about various areas of his body and what happens when she presses them. However, she draws attention to his neck, saying that this is the area that can put him into a deep sleep when stimulated, and this explains why Yamori always feels sleepy after having his blood drained by her. With that, Nazuna tries to suck some more of his blood, but the two are interrupted by the doorbell ringing. Nazuna goes to the door and notices that the person in question is one of her clients. Since she's tired, she tells Yamori to attend to the client and give her the massage. He answers the door, but then returns to Nazuna and tells her to fulfill her duty by attending to the client. Upon hearing this, Nazuna confesses that she can't argue with him, but she reiterates that she's tired and reminds him that Yamori might take advantage of the client, as he'll have the chance to get his hands on her. Yamori continues to insist that she come and do his job. Suddenly, Nazuna explains that she's been losing work that month because of her relationship with him, so she starts to blame him for her lack of money. Furthermore, she begins to plead, saying she'll give him a reward if Yamori helps her out. Yamori begins to reconsider the idea, but says he's never given a massage before. Nazuna then tells him he should just do what he did to her, and what's more, she approaches Yamori and says she'll reward him with another kiss after he finishes the job. After leaving work, Shirakawa walks the streets complaining after the mandatory meeting with her work colleagues. Her only desire is to go home. But on the way, Shirakawa meets Nazuna, who takes her to her house and offers her massage services. Returning to the present, Shirakawa goes to Nazuna's house again for a revitalizing massage, but is met by Yamori. In the middle of the massage, she interrupts him and asks how old he is. Yamori replies that he's only 14, something that leaves Shirakawa astonished. She then questions why he's working at such a young age. Yamori says he's only in it for the money, but he also tells her about the day he spent walking the streets alone due to his severe insomnia. And although they were the same streets, Yamori feels they feel better when enjoyed at night, and so he intends to continue enjoying every night to avoid losing that magic that only nighttime possesses. Hearing this, Shirakawa says she also felt the same way when she was the same age. At 14, when she went out at night to a convenience store, she felt as if everything around her was a large private space, there just for her. And during the conversation, she expresses interest in learning more about what made him want to drop out of school. At this, Yamori says he simply found school boring, and although he dropped out, Yamori claims he used to be a model student, so he believes he simply got tired of going to the same place over and over. Hearing this contrast between a model student and a night owl, Shirakawa laughs at the situation but says she can understand him. After all, she also feels tired of her job and colleagues, which is precisely why she decided to go to Nazuna's house, seeking a massage to relieve the stress of everyday life. And even though work is the easiest part of her routine, Shirakawa doesn't handle her bosses and colleagues very well, as she has to pretend to be having fun during those employee meetings. And when she finds herself remembering these nuances of her job too much, Shirakawa breaks down in tears and confesses that she can't stand this life anymore. And suddenly, her boss calls her, telling her to return to the office. She rushes to get back to work, otherwise she'll get in trouble with her boss. As he watches her packing her things to leave, Yamori wonders if he should really let her go. He remembers that she herself had said she needed to go, so he believes he should respect her decision. But at the same time, he realizes that she'll be leaving in the middle of the massage, which means there's a risk he won't even get paid for the job. And as he finds himself having this selfish thought, Yamori realizes that the most important thing here is Shirakawa's mental health, because even though he doesn't know her deeply, Yamori can see himself in her. At that, he slams his hand on the door and tells Shirakawa that will sleep there that night. And as for Nazuna, she shows up just in time, and just like she did with Yamori, she throws Shirakawa out the window, intending to make her see how hectic and fun the night can be. At that, Yamori goes to her and apologizes for the rude way he acted. However, he explains that when he saw her crying over her work, he felt it would be wrong to let her go. As for her, Shirakawa says that because he's still a high school student, he doesn't understand how workers' lives work, as they must always obey their boss's orders. Upon hearing this, Yamori reveals that Nazuna is a vampire, and since he's tired of this everyday human life, he decided to become one just so he can always have fun at night. And although Shirakawa can understand him, she continues to maintain her speech about work, and says she needs to go back to the office. However, she makes it clear that she feels less tense thanks to him. After this brief exchange, she turns to leave and says she'll root for him to become a vampire. After all, it's something she'd like to. Upon hearing this, Yamori promises to turn her into a vampire as soon as he succeeds. Another day, Nazuna presses Yamori for new ideas for what they can do. Suddenly, she decides to take him to the night pools, a place full of adults and drinks, a completely different experience than the gym class pools Yamori was used to. As for Nazuna, she's being hit on by the guys, giving them an opening to continue their conversation. However, Yamori notices this movement from afar and pulls her back. They leave, and Yamori says he didn't enjoy the night pools. After all, the place is just a den of people interested in each other and nothing more. Seeing him upset about their last outing, Nazuna grabs Yamori and begins to levitate with him, then throws him into his school pool, while laughing at the boy's astonished face. Yamori, however, is undecided about what he felt that day, but believes he'll get the answer if he asks Nazuna. As he walks through the streets, Yamori decides to hurry so as not to be approached by anyone he knows, until suddenly, Shirakawa finds him and tells him she's returning home. Earlier than usual that day, she also hands him a drink as a thank you for what he did for her the day before. Hearing this, Yamori is left speechless, and then Shirakawa reminds him that he had promised to turn her into a vampire if she wanted, and the simple fact that she can still count on that is enough to lift the weight off Shirakawa's shoulders. And seeing someone pleasing him, Yamori finds the situation strange, as he's not usually treated so well by others. Suddenly, it starts to rain heavily, and Yamori hurries again to avoid getting too wet. He takes shelter in a covered area, when suddenly, Yamori sees a man approaching a woman, but then leaves the place. Upon seeing this scene, he deduces that the girl has rejected the man, refusing to have any kind of intimacy with him. Just then, the same girl approaches Yamori and explains that, in fact, the man from before was offering money to go out with her. Upon hearing this, Yamori sympathizes with the girl, saying that this must be very exhausting. However, the girl says that, in reality, she was expecting to be harassed after all. Her boredom is so intense that she wants to go out with random men every now and then, just to pass the time. At this, Yamori asks why he refused that guy from before, and she simply replies that he doesn't was his type. After all, she doesn't just pick up anyone out of boredom. As for Yamori, he notices that she tends to live the nightlife in a somewhat dangerous way, but he keeps that opinion to himself. And suddenly, the girl takes Yamori's soda and leaves the place. He then follows her in hopes of getting his drink back, but along the way, the girl starts talking more about herself and says she feels empty and lacking in pleasant stimuli in her daily life, just like Yamori. Feeling a connection with her, Yamori tries to reassure her that everything will be fine. She hugs him, thanking him for his words, until suddenly she threatens to bite him, revealing herself to be a vampire. But before she can do anything, Nazuna appears in the nick of time and saves him. The two engage in combat, and then one of the girl's companions grabs Yamori and takes him to a place with several other vampires. Just then, one of the vampires, a woman named Nico, asks which one he preferred, as the one he chooses will turn him into a vampire too. She names each of the vampires and says that the girl he met back then was Sarikikyu, and that she's also an option to turn him into a vampire if he prefers it that way. Upon hearing this, Yamori says he intends to let Nazuna turn him into a vampire. However, the girls begin to argue with him, discussing his qualities and why he should choose one of them. At this point, Yamori begins to open up to Nico, as she's the most similar to Nazuna among the vampires. But as the conversation progresses, the vampires begin to bring up more feminine topics, leaving Yamori completely sidelined. Meanwhile, Nazuna reveals to Sari that she dislikes the other vampires' gossipy ways, and that's why she's never been able to fit in with them. Sari reminds her that she blushes easily, which is why she can't hold a romantic conversation for long. Yet, she still flirts with a human for no apparent reason, which leaves Sari somewhat confused. Nazuna then breaks Sari's expectations and reveals that she has a plan to leave descendants. Upon hearing this, Sari realizes that Nazuna already has a suitor and believes Yamori is merely her plaything, not the person she will transform into her descendant. Meanwhile, Midori approaches Yamori to try to win him over, but when asked if she's the kind of girl he likes, Yamori doesn't mince words and says no. After all, he doesn't know what it's like to like someone, and therefore, he's unable to give a more complete answer beyond that. Upon hearing this, Miko reminds him that Yamori only has two options: either become a vampire through them, or be killed, as he can't continue living as a human knowing everything he knows about vampires. At this point, Yamori reveals that he is actually interested in becoming a vampire, and he's not just saying this out of fear of being killed. During their conversation, they are interrupted by Nazuna, who goes to pick up Yamori. But before they can leave, Kabura approaches them and says she's curious to find out why Nazuna likes Yamori so much. So she asks the boy to hang out with her when Nazuna is busy. And as for Nico, she begins to interrogate Nazuna more incisively, asking why she chose to have a descendant as young as Yamori. And the boy in turn responds saying that his blood satisfies Nazuna's taste, and as for her, the girl promised that she will turn him into a vampire. Thus, the relationship between the two is built only on an agreement between them. And upon hearing this, Nico understands the relationship between the two and decides to give them a vote of confidence. However, she makes it clear that they will have a certain amount of time to turn Yamori into a vampire, otherwise, they will change their strategy and return to pursue them. Upon hearing that Yamori intends to spend many years becoming a vampire, Nico reminds him that vampires have up to a year to turn a human into a vampire. Because if a human does not become a vampire within a year after having their blood sucked for the first time, the effect will not occur. After all, this will mean that Yamori is not compatible to become a vampire. And after this conversation between Yamori and Nico, Nazuna turns to him and kisses him to make up for the massage he gave Kiyosumi. And at another point, Yamori meets Akira and tells him about the time limit he has to fall in love with Nazuna, which is a difficult reality for him to accept, considering that he will have to abandon his dream of becoming a vampire if he fails in this task. As for Akira, she reminds him that he'll be in danger of failing the mission, as the vampires certainly won't let Yamori live, as he knows so much about the vampire world. Hearing this, Yamori starts to get scared, as he hadn't thought about it that way. He then feels like he only has 1 year left to live, but Akira reassures him, saying that he still has the option of falling in love with Nazuna. And another day, Akira walks around school, thinking about the situation Yamori has gotten himself into, when suddenly, she comes face to face with Mihiru, one of the students. Seeing him lying on the floor, she asks what he's doing, and he in turn says he was just disoriented. After all, he'd overdone it the night before, resulting in the discomfort Akira sees in him now. Hearing this answer, Akira instantly remembers Yamori and notices that young people have mysteriously started going out more often at night, almost as if it were a new youthful trend. She asks him what he was doing the night before, and Mihiru, still embarrassed, says he was with his crush. Hearing this, Akira hopes he's not also dating a vampire. Mihiru tells them to forget about his problems. After all, he's more concerned about Yamori, who hasn't been to school in a long time. And speaking of him, Mihiru says he's looking forward to hanging out with Akira and Yamori again. But when he hears him talking like they've already hung out, Akira asks when that happened, and as for him, Mihiru changes the subject and says he thought they were friends. However, Akira reminds him that he has a lot of friends, and that's why she doesn't remember seeing Mihiru with her and Yamori at any time. And well, after the conversation, Akira heads to his room. And as soon as night falls, Yamori begins walking the streets as usual, until suddenly, he comes face to face with Sari, and immediately turns his back to run away from her, believing the girl is there to harm him. Then, Sari pulls him back, and asks more about his process of becoming a vampire. In this, Yamori reveals his concern about the fact that he only has 1 year to fall in love with Nazuna. Furthermore, Yamori takes it upon himself to decide whether or not to become a vampire. Unlike Nazuna, who can do nothing to speed up the process, Yamori is the only one capable of deciding the success of this mission. He simply needs to fall in love. But even though the solution seems simple, Yamori still doesn't know exactly how to fall in love. Seeing a high school student struggling with these internal conflicts, Sari becomes breathless with emotion and offers to help him with his love issues. In this case, she advises him to ask Nazuna out on a date. But as soon as Yamori tries to ask her out, Nazuna shuts the door in his face and claims to be too busy playing video games. Yamori then goes to her room and turns off the console, practically forcing Nazuna to go on a date with him. And in the end, he finally gets what he wanted. However, he takes her to see a romantic movie at the cinema, an idea that goes completely wrong. Nazuna interprets the tedious activity as a provocation on his part. With that said, they leave the theater, and Nazuna begins to suspect that someone has been putting things in Yamori's head and deduces that Sari is the wife in question. After the failed date, Yamori returns home desolate, tossing and turning in bed, wondering what he did wrong. Nazuna stops by his house and invites him to go for a walk, as a way to make up for their disastrous encounter earlier, but suddenly they get lost. While searching for Nazuna, Yamori encounters Mihiru along the way. During their conversation, Yamori recalls how Mihiru was loved by everyone at school since elementary school, considered the perfect student in every way. And suddenly, Akira finds the two by chance, and Mihiru decides to return to his friends, and leaves Yamori alone with Akira. However, they soon separate, and then Yamori meets Nazuna again. When going out for a walk at night, Sari meets Yamori on the streets, and then tries to throw herself into his arms. However, Nazuna appears just in time and prevents her from getting too close to the boy. And Yamori, in turn, makes it clear that Siria wasn't trying to do anything wrong to him. In this, Nazuna explains that the simple fact that she looked at Sari's face was enough for her leg to move on its own. Suddenly, Sari gets up in a huff and starts arguing with Nazuna. Eventually, they just sit down to talk, and Sari begins to explain herself, saying she wasn't trying to kill Yamori, even though she heard it directly from her. Nazuna reminds her that Sari already tried to kill him, so she remains a suspect. At the end of the conversation, Sari decides to leave the place, saying she was just trying to have some fun with the boy, but nothing more. Seeing her leaving, Yamori stops her and asks if she really doesn't have something more serious to discuss with him. At this, Sari decides to change her mind and invites him to karaoke. Once there, she reveals that she's been very bored lately, mainly because she's popular and always has to deal with so many guys chasing her. With that said, the two head to the karaoke room to sing a few songs. But seeing that Yamori doesn't seem to be having fun, Sari begins to question him. To this, Yamori simply says that he's not up to date with the latest music, and because he doesn't know the new songs, he can't enjoy it as much as she does. With that said, Yamori puts on an older song, and as they listen to the music, the two are surprised by a man knocking on the door. At this, Yamori deduces that the guy simply chose the wrong room, but Sari reveals that the guy is actually one of the men who keeps coming after her, due to her immense popularity. Hearing this, Yamori becomes alarmed and asks her to do something about it. She then simply waves at the guy, and with that, he leaves, simply seeking some of her attention. As for Yamori, he finally understands the kind of problems Sari has been having lately and asks what needs to be done to improve her situation. Sari then tells Yamori that if the boys continue to bother her, she can simply kill them. After all, vampires naturally have a human instinct. Hearing this, Yamori says that vampires are very arrogant beings, and Sari, in turn, tells him to stop imposing human moral standards on vampires, as both races act and think differently. And since Sari misunderstood him, Yamori says that there are indeed humans she should kill, but he believes the guy outside isn't one of those people who deserves death. As for the guy, he finally manages to enter the room and notices the two discussing something about him. As for Sari, she assumes there's nothing left to do with such an out-of-control individual other than kill him. But as soon as she tries to mark the boy, Yamori manages to stop her, giving the young man space to run away. Once alone with the stalker, Yamori begins to ask him some questions. During this time, the boy tells her a little more about how he met Sari. The day she found him lying on the ground, his glasses missing from his sight after a fall. Then she puts on the boy's glasses, and seeing that he can't see anything, Sari starts to mock the boy's lack of vision. But little by little they meet up and talk more about various subjects. And one of these days, the young man reveals that he had a girlfriend. But because he is very jealous and constantly worries for no reason, she ended up dumping him. And even though he went out with Sari that day, the boy believes she only paid him attention because he got drunk and fell to the ground, meaning she was just feeling sorry for him. That said, the boy makes it clear that he doesn't intend to be close friends or have anything serious with Sari. However, he wants to at least see her from time to time, even if it's from afar. And suddenly, in the middle of their conversation, they are interrupted by Sari, who arrives to kill her stalker once and for all. However, Yamori once again intervenes, saying he won't let her kill the boy. Hearing this, Sari deduces that Yamori also wants to die, and so she decides to attack him first. But suddenly, Nazuna appears once again to save him. Seeing Sari being pinned to the ground, the stalker tells Nazuna to stop and reveals that in fact, it's all his fault for falling in love with Sari, as they were initially supposed to be just friends. That said, the stalker belatedly introduces himself as Akiyama. As for Sari, she decides not to kill the boy anymore, but makes it clear that they should stop seeing each other. But as soon as she says this, Sari bursts into tears and says that she actually doesn't want to stop being his friend. As for Akiyama, he decides to end things in an easier way in this case. The boy asks her to make him one of her descendants. After fulfilling his request, Sari calls everyone to celebrate her new offspring at karaoke. Two men are approached by Midori, who hands them a poster inviting them to a vampire-themed maid cafe. Afterward, Nazuna accidentally passes by Midori. As soon as she sees her, Midori dresses Nazuna up as a maid, inviting her to work at the maid cafe that night. Nazuna asks if Yamori intends to stay there as well, or if he wants to do something else, and he, in turn, shows no objection to her choosing to work there that night. As for Midori, she asks Yamori to pose as a customer so they can practice customer service. However, the moment Nazuna meets Yamori for the first time, she speaks like a zombie, expressionless. At this, Midori begins to complain to her, reminding her that all necessary instructions have already been given, so she should simply follow what was said. However, Nazuna says she can't remember a list of tasks as extensive as the one she gave. Upon hearing this, Midori begs Nazuna not to ruin her reputation at the restaurant. Moving on, another employee serves Yamori. Noting that this is her first time there, the girl introduces herself as Arisa, one of the house's vampire maids. She begins to talk about her personal taste and the places she frequents when she's free from work. As for Yamori, he praises the attendant's excellent performance. Arisa then thanks him for his willingness to honor her work by praising her. And continuing with the conversation, Arisa reveals that Midori arrived at the establishment and was a knockout, earning top spot among the employees, demonstrating tremendous competence at work. And although it may not seem like it, Arisa says she was the #1 employee before Midori arrived. With that said, Arisa decides to stop talking so much and asks Yamori to keep their conversation a secret. Upon further reflection, Yamori says that neither Arisa nor Midori appear to have any striking differences in their customer service. Another time, he meets the girls after work. Yamori suddenly finds some photos of them scattered around the internet, possibly taken by clients. Yamori notices a pattern in the photos. Most of them are targeting Arisa. Hearing this, Midori decides to hurry and catch the culprit responsible for those photos. As for Yamori, he continues to look at the photos when suddenly, he's surprised by Arisa, who feels embarrassed to see him staring at her photos like that. Getting straight to the point, she says she already knows what happened. Yamori remains focused on finding out who took the photos, and so he begins looking for the direction from which the photos might have been taken, based solely on the angle of the photos. Seeing that he intends to stay there, Arisa calls him out, asking for permission so she can change and continue her work. Upon leaving the room, Yamori meets Nazuna, who tells him that she also hasn't found any clues as to who took the photos. Suddenly, Yamori notices a door in the room that apparently leads to the balcony. Yamori decides to explore the area, but upon seeing a padlock on the door, they turn around and fly up to the balcony. Arriving at the location, Yamori notices that the angle of the photos matches that location, suggesting that the person responsible for the photos took them on the building's balcony. Suddenly, Arisa notices strange movement on the balcony and opens the window to see what's going on. She runs into Yamori and Nazuna, who explain that they're just to gather clues that will lead them to the person responsible for the photos. Upon hearing this, Arisa closes the window and returns to work. As for Yamori, he starts taking photos of the inside of the room from the window, and after a few shots, he comes to a conclusion. Hearing this, Nazuna is curious to hear what he has to say. However, Yamori only says that the person responsible for the photos will likely return to the crime scene, though he's not entirely certain. Later, Midori meets with Yamori, and when asked about the progress of the investigation, Yamori disappoints her, demonstrating that he hasn't discovered anything particularly useful. Suddenly, they hear Arisa approaching, and Yamori hides in the closet with Midori, telling them they should stay hidden and just watch what happens. Since the suspect is after Arisa, Yamori believes he will only act when she is alone. After a few minutes in the closet, they hear the window opening, and quickly leave the closet to confront the stalker taking the photos. However, upon reaching the window, they discover that the one taking the photos was Arisa herself. They sit down to talk, and Yamori asks why she did all that. Upon hearing this, Midori says he's very slow because it's obvious what happened. Meanwhile, Arisa was frustrated that Midori had taken her top spot, and so she created a secret stalker to imply that she, too, remains popular. At another moment, Arisa notices Yamori drinking alone, and then she sits down next to him and comments on the previous incident and confesses that she actually takes a lot of pictures of herself, almost obsessively. With that said, she points her phone at them and does what she does best, taking selfies. The next night, Yamori visits Nazuna and notices that she's been sprucing up the house with the money she earned, working as a maid at the maid cafe. Nazuna then decides to leave the house to find people who look tired, so she can offer her massage services. Yamori does the same, hoping to help her with her business. During a brief stroll through the streets, he encounters a woman who looks tired, and he stops in front of her, staring at her, unsure of what to say. Suddenly, the girl notices him staring at her and asks what he wants. Yamori then says he noticed she was tired and asks them to talk. As soon as he takes her to another place, Yamori apologizes for having spoken to her in a flirtatious manner and says that he actually invited her to offer a massage. However, he makes it clear that the massage will be performed by another girl, who in this case is his friend. Upon hearing this, the girl says that his friend shouldn't hire a minor for work after 10 p.m. So she makes it clear that she can report their scheme at any time if she wants. Upon hearing this, Yamori starts to sweat. However, the girl says that she was just joking with him, because in reality, she doesn't usually make her decisions based solely on the law. I don't know if this is a good thing to talk about. I don't know. I'm almost sure there's some law talking about this, therefore. She assures him that she has no intention of turning them over to the police. With that said, she decides to hire his massage services, as she's always tired from her job. Upon hearing this, Yamori asks what she does for a living, and she reveals her badge, revealing that she's a detective and her name is Anko Yugwesu. And upon discovering that detectives actually exist, Yamori is thrilled. He then asks more about the crimes she investigates, but she says she only deals with infidelity cases or interpersonal issues, but nothing more. And as he talks a little more about herself, Anko starts asking him some questions too, and asks if he knows someone named Akishito Akiyama. Yamori hears the name and can't connect it to anyone, until Anko suddenly shows him a photo of the person she's talking about, and says he's also known by the nickname Akin. Upon seeing who it is, Yamori realizes she's been talking about Sari's stalker all along. Even though she knows the boy, Yamori decides to pretend he doesn't know who he is. After the meeting, Yamori goes to Nazuna's house and tells her about his encounter with Anko. The next night, Mihiru brings Akira and Yamori together and invites them to school. Once there, Mihiru says he decided to take them there so they could have fun like in the old days, when Yamori still went to school. As they walk through the school hallways, Mihiru reminds them about the urban legend of the 7 mysteries of the school. Seeing him trying to get into these scarier topics, Akira starts to feel uncomfortable. But Mihiru says that a school at night is the perfect setting for such stories. Mihiru decides to start exploring the legend of Bathroom Hanako. However, he tells Akira to go ahead and try to summon the entity himself. But as soon as she calls out to the Hanako, Mihiru answers her with a dark voice, making her jump in fright. At that, Akira takes it out with a punch to Mihiru's head. Moving on, they investigate the school's other legends, but ultimately they find no entity. However, Mihiru says that that particular school has another legend. A teacher there disappeared a long time ago, but he often appears in one of the classrooms at night. Upon hearing this story, Akira and Yamori dismiss it as artificial. Mihiru is irritated by their disregard and says that, like the legend of the professor, the 7 school mysteries also lack a deep story. With that said, they decide to follow Mihiru's plan and begin searching through the classrooms for the professor. Suddenly, they come across an old man alone in one of the rooms. The creature flies toward Akira, and Yamori realizes immediately that the man is a vampire and knocks him away with a chair to the head. Having done this, Yamori notices that the vampire is very different from the conventional one, because besides not being handsome like a vampire, he also seems to be completely messed up mentally. At this, the man regains some rationality and asks them to escape before he loses control again. And suddenly, Anko goes to the place and lets herself be bitten by the vampire. But as soon as he bites her, he tastes a horrible taste of her blood and begins to cry in Anko's lap, lamenting that he is a vampire with an almost uncontrollable desire for human blood. Sensing all the suffering he appears to be experiencing, Anko decides to hold his hand until sunrise. Feeling the sunlight on his skin, he slowly begins to evaporate until nothing remains. After doing so, Anko reveals that the man was the teacher who used to teach at that school and who disappeared 10 years ago. As for Yamori, he begins to complain to her about Anko killing him. However, she reminds him that he had been suffering for a long time and needed a well-deserved rest. Upon returning home, Yamori continues to think about what Anko told him about him knowing nothing about vampires. He decides to meet Nazuna and tell her about the out-of-control vampire he saw at school. Hearing this, Nazuna deduces that he was simply starving, which is why he completely lost control. With that said, they go for a walk. On the way, Nazuna explains that vampires die after 10 years without drinking blood, and this is more common with those vampires who refuse to accept what they have become and die without feeding. Continuing the conversation, she asks about the detective he mentioned. Yamori says he doesn't know much about her, only that Anko doesn't really like vampires. And for that very reason, she tries to talk him out of becoming one. And although he's not thinking about giving up, Yamori says he's worried after all. Anko not only knows how to kill vampires, but has already killed one in front of him. With that, he changes the subject and exposes his neck for her to suck his blood. Afterward, he meets Mihiru, and while they talk, Mihiru asks why he wants to become a vampire. After all, he reminds him that the thing that attacked them at school the night before was precisely an uncontrolled vampire, the being Yamori aspires to become. And seeing the facts being put this way, Yamori doesn't know what to say. And as for Mihiru, he reminds him again about their friendship that has lasted for years, and then he asks again what Yamori intends to do by becoming a vampire. Hearing this, he thinks better of it, and realizes that his on-life desire to become a vampire is to conquer the freedom it brings. But upon reflection, he realizes that this freedom was already conquered long ago, while he was still human. After all, Yamori no longer goes to school as he would like, and he can also roam freely at night. Therefore, Yamori doesn't understand why he wants to become a vampire, and deduces that Nazuna has some involvement in his decision. As for Mihiru, he begins to pressure him more and more to reveal his true intentions in becoming a vampire, because at this point, he believes Yamori is planning to deceive people just to suck their blood. And although he's pressuring him, Mihiru asks Yamori to think it over and give him an answer later. So, Yamori goes to Nazuna's house to pick her up and takes her to his house for the first time. As they talk, Nazuna notices that he's feeling confused about his decision to become her descendant, as a normal person would eventually reconsider this idea for the sake of his family and friends. As for Yamori, he says that his friend asked him why he wanted to become a vampire, and for him, this is a question that doesn't have a a definitive answer, as only vague things always come to Yamori's mind, such as the simple fact that he likes the night. But at the same time, Yamori began to realize that not everything is just about having fun, because by seeking that first, he could end up hurting his classmates. Seeing that he's truly confused by this whole thing, Nazuna decides to help him with this difficult decision, and explains that the reason he likes the night so much is because this time of day is the most unusual of all, and while being different from the ordinary may sound fun, Nazuna reminds him that unusual things don't usually last long, and besides, she reveals that being a vampire is the most boring thing ever. Upon hearing this, Yamori asks why she only showed him the fun parts of being a vampire, and she, in turn, believes she did so because she wanted things to actually be fun. Another day, Yamori meets Anko and asks how much she knows about him beyond the fact that he wants to become a vampire. Anko then proceeds to share all the information she can about him, and then Yamori returns to talking about his dream of becoming a vampire. He then asks why she opposes this idea. Anko responds obviously, saying that vampires are evil towards humans, which for her is reason enough not to want to become one. And although she knows that humans can bring misfortune upon themselves, Anko still opposes vampires doing the same thing. After all, any misfortune caused by vampires shouldn't even happen. Furthermore, she reminds him that he himself witnessed a case of a vampire attacking his friend. However, Yamori says that in that vampire's case, it happened because he hadn't drunk blood for more than 10 years, and so it's natural for him to become that way. Upon hearing this, Anko reminds him that the vampire is an exception who chose to maintain his pride as a human. But in Yamori's case, she's not sure he'll have the same self-control, and although she wants him as a human, Anko knows the vampires will come after him to kill him at any moment, and so she promises to kill them one by one if they try to do anything to him. And upon hearing her bloodthirsty reasoning, Yamori says he doesn't agree to nothing. At this point, Anko calls the authorities and reports Yamori, saying that he is just a high school student, but he is walking the streets alone late at night. Upon hearing her report, Yamori starts running back home, but ends up stopping at a park to throw the police off the scent. Suddenly, a girl approaches him and asks if he remembers her. He then searches his memory and remembers her name, Hatsuka. Yamori heads to Hatsuka's house, and upon arriving there, he comes face to face with three rather excited people, and then he doesn't understand anything. And as for Hatsuka, she tells everyone that she will have a new guest for that night. So she orders the three to leave. But upon hearing this, the three become irritated, as they feel wrong for being replaced by a strange boy. However, since it is Hatsuka's order, they obey her. While she's taking a shower, Yamori sits in the living room, reflecting on what just happened, as he still doesn't quite understand the relationship between those three people and Hatsuka. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted by Hatsuka, who asks him to bring her a towel, as she forgot to bring it. Seeing her naked, Yamori discovers that Hatsuka is actually a guy. Noticing his surprise, Hatsuka is confused, as she thought Nazuna had already told her about it. However, Yamori says that, in fact, Nazuna never told her anything about it. Meanwhile, Nazuna meets with the other vampires and asks them to leave Yamori alone, even if he can't become a vampire. Upon hearing this, Nico reminds her that Yamori knows a lot about vampires and consequently can alert other humans to the danger of their existence, so Yamori must be eliminated no matter what. At this, Nazuna opposes her decision, saying she's willing to give her own life if necessary to stop them. Hearing this, Nico becomes angry and goes to Nazuna to ask her exactly what she thinks of Yamori. Meanwhile, Hatsuka discovers that Yamori is unsure about his decision to become a vampire, and this leaves her shocked. As they continue talking, Yamori also tells her about the vampire Anko had killed, holding him up to the sun until he turned to ash. Hatsuka deduces something about this, but prefers not to say much, because even though she is a vampire, she also doesn't know much about her own kind. And as for the vampire's horrible taste, Hatsuka also doesn't know exactly why he didn't drink Anko's blood. In Yamori's case, Hatsuka claims to have heard from Nazuna that his blood is some of the best, so she throws herself at him, expressing interest in sucking his blood. But in the midst of all this, she receives a photo from Nazuna, showing a completely destroyed table. Hatsuka asks if he understands what that means, and Yamori says that all the destruction has a clear meaning. If he fails to become a vampire, he could be killed at any moment. But beyond that, Yamori realizes that Nazuna is trying to protect him, facing the vampires head-on. Upon hearing this, Hatsuka informs him that death is not a definitive punishment for vampires. After all, Nazuna and Yamori can be punished in other ways. As for Yamori, Hatsuka informs him that he is not in danger, unlike Nazuna. At this, Yamori stands up in despair, wanting to help her friend. However, Hatsuka knocks him down again against the sofa and says that the best decision he can make now is to become one of her descendants, as he will only be able to save Nazuna if he becomes a vampire. And although she's right, Yamori says he's not attracted to Hatsuka either, so there's no way she can turn him into a vampire like Nazuna. However, Hatsuka says she can trick his brain into thinking he loves her. But upon hearing this, Yamori says he still wants to fall in love with Nazuna, even if it takes longer. To this, Hatsuka reminds him that Nico is furious, so there's no way they can know what she's capable of. Upon hearing this, Yamori agrees with her, but he still runs toward Nazuna. Upon arriving, he is greeted only by Nico, who tells him that Nazuna has already left. At this, Yamori feels more at ease, as he thinks she is fine. However, Nico says that in fact, the girl received a proper punishment, and because of that, she won't be able to have a minimally adequate conversation with him for a long time. And as she continues, Yamori becomes even more concerned, asking what exactly happened to Nazuna. Nico just gives him a frightening look, but doesn't say anything. So, Yamori decides to go look for Nazuna on his own, and along the way, he runs into the police, who try to approach him with the intention of sending him back home. Yamori jumps off the bridge to escape the police and continue his search for Nazuna, until he finally finds her buying drinks and asks if she's hurt. Nazuna, in turn, tells him to stay calm about it. She's fine. With that, she starts walking in the opposite direction, but Yamori tries to call her back, saying that her boring life ended the first day they met. So, he asks if she felt the same way when she met him. Nazuna confirms that she did, saying she always tried to act like a know-it-all when she was with him, when in reality, all the experiences they were having were new to her too. Hearing this, Yamori pulls her back to him, saying that he also sees those adventures as new. And furthermore, he promises to do everything to fall in love with her, so that they can continue living together, free from boredom. Hearing these words, Nazuna blushes again, as always, but this time, she pulls him in for a kiss. My friends, this season it was totally worth it here. If you want the second season, like this video. If you want even more videos here on this channel, let's go towards 20,000 subscribers. Because I'm going to start posting with gusto here. There's anime to choose from. And I'm going to bring each one of them to you. And I'll see you in the next video. I went.